The arena was a monster. A sprawling coliseum of jagged metal and towering obsidian spires, built on the ruins of a dead world. The air hummed with the energy of 1,000,000 spectators who had gathered from across the galaxy to witness the ultimate gladiatorial tournament. The galaxy's deadliest warriors, champions of their respective planets, were lined up, each waiting for their turn to enter the fray. And standing among them, as out of place as a stone in the sky, was one human, Carter Rios. He wasn't supposed to be here. The Galactic Circuit was the proving ground for species who had survived the test of time, a brutal competition that only the strongest, the most cunning, the most merciless could survive. But Carter wasn't just any human. He was a relic of Earth's military past, a ghost who had walked through the fires of war and lived to tell the tale, a creature forged in conflict, with a kill count that could make even the most savage species tremble. Yet here he was, the lone human, ready to step into the arena. He had been invited, though not by choice. The Galactic Council had made it clear. Earth was an unknown quantity, primitive, dangerous, yet undeniably resilient. And so, they had decided to test it. They had invited Carter, not because they expected him to succeed, but because they needed to see if humans were worthy of more than just their reputation as a nuisance. They needed to know, could one human stand among the greatest fighters the galaxy had ever known? The crowd was already chanting, a cacophony of alien languages, the sounds reverberating across the structure like the thunder before a storm. Carter stood still, his gaze locked on the gates that would soon open to reveal his first opponent, a creature that had earned its place in the tournament through centuries of brutal conquests. The fighter was known as Varric, a species of reptilian gladiator from the frigid moon of Dragon Prime. With scales harder than steel and claws capable of rending metal, Varric was a living weapon. Yet Carter wasn't fazed. He had seen worse. Far worse. The metallic gates groaned, slowly opening to reveal the alien behemoth. The crowd fell into a hush as Varric stalked into the arena, his massive form casting a shadow over the battlefield. With each step, the ground trembled beneath the weight of his armored, scaly body. The beast's eyes locked onto Carter, and for the first time, Carter saw something different, fear. Not from himself, but from the crowd. They hadn't expected the human to be here. They hadn't expected him to survive the long journey to this hostile world. But here he stood, unbowed, unafraid, his posture betraying nothing of the storm brewing inside him. Carter's mind raced, calculating the odds of survival, assessing every variable. The alien size, the weapons it carried, the layout of the arena, it all mattered. But the one thing that didn't matter was the expectation. No one had ever seen a human fight in this arena, let alone win. They expected him to be a blip, a one-time curiosity, something to laugh about in hushed tones until he was swiftly dispatched. But that was not going to happen. Carter Rios wasn't here to play the game by their rules. He was here to rewrite them. The announcer's voice boomed through the arena, its synthetic tone echoing across the Coliseum. And now, the first challenger to enter the arena from the distant planet Earth, a species unknown to most of the galaxy. Please welcome Carter Rios. The crowd erupted into laughter, a wave of scorn that crashed down on Carter like 1,000 fists. They mocked him, jeered at the idea that this tiny, fragile creature would dare challenge a gladiator like Varric. But Carter didn't flinch. He didn't move. His eyes locked onto his opponent, his muscles coiling like a spring ready to snap. This was what they wanted to see. The struggle, the fight, the triumph. The gates slammed shut behind him, sealing his fate. And in that instant, as the arena fell into an almost eerie silence, Carter knew exactly what he had to do. Survive. No more than that. He had to show them what it meant to face humanity. To face him. Varric charged with terrifying speed, his claws raised for the kill. Carter moved just in time, sliding beneath the monster's outstretched arms, feeling the wind of its attack brush against his skin. He rolled, sprang to his feet, and faced the creature again, this time ready. The battle had begun. But what the galaxy didn't know was that they weren't just witnessing a fight for survival. They were about to witness the birth of a legend. The ground beneath Carter's boots shook with the weight of destiny. He had no time for fear, no room for hesitation. The arena was alive, its massive expanse stretching out in all directions, filled with the roars of thousands of alien spectators. Every inch of the colossal structure was designed for death, and this battle was no exception. There was no turning back. Carter's opponent, Varric, stood opposite him, its grotesque form towering and covered in thick, armored scales. The creature's breath hissed through its bared teeth as it circled, calculating its attack. Varric was a seasoned gladiator, a living legend in its own right, brutal, fast, and unrelenting. It had slain hundreds in the arena, earning its reputation as an undefeatable force. But Carter was not the typical challenger. This was no alien beast or monstrous creature with instinct as its only weapon. Carter was a soldier, trained to kill with precision, to think 3 steps ahead, and to survive in environments far more hostile than any alien planet could muster. The battle began with a sudden roar from Varric, who lunged forward with terrifying speed. The ground vibrated as the gladiator's claws slashed through the air, aimed straight for Carter's head. It was a blow that could sever a human in 2. But Carter was faster. He sidestepped, his movements smooth, almost graceful in contrast to the brutal force of his opponent. Varric's massive claw scraped the air where Carter had just been standing. Carter didn't waste a second. He rolled beneath the alien's legs, staying low to avoid being caught by its outstretched limbs. As he came up behind Varric, he caught a glimpse of the audience's faces, confusion, disbelief, a tinge of fear. Carter had spent years fighting in environments where every second counted, where survival depended on instincts honed through experience. He had faced enemies that, on paper, should have been unbeatable, yet he was still here, still standing. He knew the importance of reading an enemy's body language, of predicting their movements before they even made them. Varric was powerful, but Carter's skill was in knowing where and when to strike. Varric, clearly surprised by Carter's agility, snarled and spun on its heel, its tail whipping around to catch Carter off guard. The blow landed with a sickening crack against the ground next to him, but Carter was already on the move. His training kicked in. He didn't hesitate. He didn't flinch. Carter launched himself at Varric's back, delivering a precise strike to the alien's spine with his elbow. The creature recoiled, its body jerking forward. Carter wasn't finished. He darted behind it, dodging its powerful tail again, and used his momentum to tackle Varric to the ground. The arena roared with a mix of excitement and disbelief. The mighty Varric, the undefeated champion, was on the ground, struggling to regain its footing as Carter pinned it beneath him. But Carter wasn't naive. He knew better than to think the fight was over. Varric's resilience was as legendary as its strength. The alien began to thrash, trying to claw at Carter's face, its claws making sickening noises as they scraped the hard metal of the arena floor. Carter barely dodged them, but he didn't let up. His hand shot to his waist, drawing a small, sharp blade from his belt. He stabbed down toward Varric's exposed throat. The blade sank into the creature's scales, but it wasn't deep enough to do the job. Carter didn't back down. With a grunt, he twisted the knife, driving it deeper into Varric's neck, right at the joint where the creature's armor was weakest. The gladiator's body shuddered beneath him, and Varric's blood began to seep out in thick, dark pools. The audience gasped, their shock evident as they watched a human, someone they'd barely considered a threat, begin to overpower a beast they had deemed unstoppable. Varric's struggle slowed, then stopped. The gladiator's massive body collapsed, lifeless, onto the arena floor. Carter stood over the fallen beast, panting but unscathed. For a moment, there was silence. The crowd's disbelief hung thick in the air. Then the noise began. The roars, the cheers, the murmurs of awe and fear. Carter looked up, meeting the eyes of the thousands of spectators. There were no more laughs, no mocking stares, just stunned silence, followed by a deafening wave of applause. But Carter wasn't done. He had no time for glory. As the crowd went wild, he wiped his blade clean on Varric's shattered armor and turned to face the towering walls of the arena. There were more fights to come, more enemies, more blood to spill. This was just the beginning. The reality of what Carter had done started to sink in. He wasn't a curiosity anymore. He wasn't the underdog. The galaxy was watching, and Carter had just shown them something they hadn't expected. A human who could fight like a god of war. There were many who believed the game was rigged, that the tournament was meant to be an exercise in humiliation for the human species. But Carter was more than a pawn. He wasn't here to entertain the crowd. He was here to prove a point. Humanity wasn't to be underestimated. As the announcer's voice rang out, declaring Carter the victor, he didn't feel pride. He felt a strange calmness settle over him. He had won. And in doing so, he had set the stage for what was to come, a bloodied path to the top of the gladiatorial world. No one was ready for what would follow next. But Carter was prepared. He always had been. The arena had a new champion. And Carter Rios wasn't going to stop until the galaxy knew exactly what it meant to face a human in combat. The galaxy had no idea what it had just witnessed. Carter Rios stood alone in the center of the arena, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. The lifeless body of Varric, the legendary gladiator, lay crumpled at his feet. Blood, thick and dark, pooled around the alien's carcass, staining the once pristine floor. Around him, the deafening roar of the crowd began to fade into a strange, surreal silence. The applause was there, but it felt distant, almost too quiet, like the galaxy itself had yet to process what had just happened. It wasn't just a victory. It was a statement. Carter hadn't just killed an opponent. He'd shattered their understanding of what humanity was capable of. For years, the galaxy had dismissed humans as primitive, fragile creatures, nothing more than a nuisance at best. But this fight, this arena, had exposed them to something far more dangerous than they had ever anticipated. He knew the crowd was stunned. He could feel the weight of their eyes, the disbelief radiating from every corner of the Colosseum. But Carter wasn't here for their approval. He was here to survive, to show them exactly what a human could do when pushed to the edge. As the arena doors opened and his victory was officially declared, Carter's mind wandered briefly to the unseen eyes that watched from beyond the arena walls, the Galactic Council. The same council that had invited him here, thinking he'd be nothing more than an easy target. They wanted to test humanity. Well, Carter had just passed their test. A screen flickered to life above him, displaying his name and a single ominous number. Kill count. 1. The number flashed once, then twice, lingering for just a second longer than it should. The implication was clear, the first of many. The crowd's noise died instantly. Eyes turned toward the giant display, all focused on the same number. A few gasps rippled through the stands, followed by hushed whispers. The aliens around him, who had once laughed and jeered, now eyed him with a mixture of awe and confusion. That number, 1 kill, seemed far too low given the spectacle they had just witnessed. But Carter wasn't done. Far from it. As he walked toward the exit, the display updated again, this time with a simple message flashing across the screen. Carter Rios, human soldier, 312 confirmed kills. The silence in the arena was deafening. This was no longer about one gladiatorial battle. It was about the legacy Carter carried with him. A legacy of a man who had waged war across hostile worlds, who had survived countless battles, assassinations, and covert operations. A legacy written in blood and scars, each kill adding to a number that no one had ever expected to see. Carter had never shared the details of his past. He didn't need to. His kill count alone was enough to tell the story. Earth had raised him to fight, and he had fought ruthlessly and without hesitation. Every mission, every conflict had built him into something far beyond the aliens' comprehension. As the news of Carter's kill count spread, the atmosphere in the arena shifted. The other gladiators, once so sure of their invincibility, began to look at him differently. There was fear in their eyes now, a lingering doubt that hadn't been there before. They couldn't deny it anymore. The human wasn't just another contender. He was a predator. The thought sent a ripple through the rest of the tournament. The invincible champions, the ones who had been hailed as the greatest warriors the galaxy had ever known, now had to ask themselves one question. What happens if Carter wins again? The announcer, trying to regain some semblance of control over the crowd, spoke into the microphone. His voice crackled with a nervous tension. The victory of Carter Rios has not only made history, it has shattered every assumption about the human race. The crowd was still uncertain. Carter could sense it. There was no longer any mockery in their voices, but the applause wasn't what it should have been either. It was as though the very essence of the tournament had changed. No longer was it a celebration of the galaxy's strongest warriors. Now it was about survival. Now, they were all trying to figure out one thing. Could Carter Rios be stopped? In the stands, a group of high-ranking officials from the Galactic Council watched, their expressions unreadable. The decision they had made to invite a human into the tournament now weighed heavily on them. They had expected to confirm their worst suspicions, that humanity was nothing more than a curiosity, a race with no place in the galactic order. But now, the question had shifted. Could the Council control a human warrior capable of such destruction? Could they risk leaving him unchecked? As Carter disappeared into the shadows of the arena, his mind was already focused on the next challenge. The galaxy had just learned the truth. Humans weren't weak. They weren't fragile. They weren't an afterthought. And they would learn the true meaning of what it meant to face one. The crowd's roar was deafening, but to Carter Rios, it might as well have been a distant hum. The spotlight of the arena blazed down on him as he stood at the center of the battlefield, staring down his next opponent. The reigning champion, Zarnoth, a beast whose reputation had made even the most seasoned gladiators quake in their boots. Zarnoth wasn't just a fighter, he was a legend. A being of terrifying size and strength, with a body that seemed to be made of living stone, his skin impervious to most weapons. He had crushed opponents in the arena for decades, his name whispered in fear by even the most elite warriors of the galaxy. To defeat Zarnoth wasn't just to win, it was to prove you belonged among the stars. And Carter was about to prove that. Zarnoth stepped into the arena, his massive form dwarfing every other gladiator who had ever fought here. His eyes, glowing like molten lava, locked onto Carter with a mix of disdain and curiosity. The crowd fell into an uneasy silence, their anticipation palpable. They had seen Carter defeat Varric with ruthless efficiency. But this was different. This wasn't just another opponent. This was a monster, the kind of creature that didn't fall easily. The two warriors sized each other up, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. Zarnoth sneered, his lips curling back to reveal rows of jagged teeth. His voice boomed across the arena like an earthquake. "You dare challenge me, human?" Carter didn't flinch. He simply nodded. "I'm not here to play games." The battle began with a violent roar from Zarnoth, who lunged forward, his enormous fists raised to crush Carter into the ground. The shockwave from his movements sent dust and debris flying through the arena. Carter dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the crushing blow. The ground shook under the force of Zarnoth's strike, leaving a massive crater where Carter had just been standing. Carter didn't waste time. His movements were fluid, calculated. He knew better than to try and match Zarnoth's strength. The key was speed, precision. His training in guerrilla warfare had taught him how to outmaneuver the largest of opponents. He darted in and out of the range of Zarnoth's heavy strikes, his fists striking quickly at the alien's joints, its weak points, where the stone-like skin was less resistant. But each hit seemed to barely faze the creature. Zarnoth growled, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through the arena, and swung again. This time, Carter was ready. He leaped over Zarnoth's fist, landing on its broad back with the agility of a panther. He drove a dagger into the creature's neck, but it barely sank in, as Zarnoth's thick hide absorbed the blow. The crowd gasped as Zarnoth turned, swiping Carter off his back, and sending him tumbling across the arena. Carter hit the ground hard, the impact sending shock waves of pain through his body. But he didn't hesitate. He rolled to his feet in an instant, his focus razor-sharp, despite the blood trickling from a gash on his cheek. Zarnoth was relentless. He advanced, his massive arms swinging, creating gusts of wind with each strike. Carter ducked and dodged, narrowly avoiding being smashed underfoot. His mind, working faster than his body, could keep up. Every step he took was calculated. Every move designed to wear the beast down, to find a crack in the impenetrable armor that was Zarnatha's body. The fight raged on. Carter's legs burned with exhaustion, his breath ragged in his chest. But he knew there was no turning back. He could see it now, the flaw in Zarnatha's defenses. The brute strength that had made him a champion was also his greatest weakness. He wasn't fast enough. He couldn't keep up with Carter's relentless movement. Carter feigned to stumble, falling to one knee as if exhausted. Zarnath took the bait, charging forward with a deafening bellow, his fists ready to pulverize the human. At the last moment, Carter rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding Zarnatha's blow. The alien's fist crashed into the arena floor with a deafening crack, sending up a cloud of dust. And that's when Carter saw it, the opening he needed. With one swift motion, Carter surged forward, sliding beneath Zarnatha's arm and delivering a well-placed strike to the creature's abdomen, where its hide was the thinnest. The blow hit with precision, sinking deep into the soft underbelly of the beast. Zarnath roared in agony, staggering backward as the pain from the strike took hold. Carter didn't stop. He pressed forward, each movement fluid, each strike calculated. He stabbed at Zarnatha's side, his blade sinking in with sickening ease. Zarnath let out a roar of fury, but it was too late. His strength was beginning to fade, his movements slowing. The legend that had ruled the arena for decades was crumbling before Carter's eyes. With one final, crushing blow, Carter drove his knife deep into Zarnatha's heart. The champion's body went rigid, then collapsed in a heap on the arena floor, the once feared gladiator now a lifeless heap of flesh and stone. Silence fell over the arena. The crowd, once filled with jeers and laughter, now stared in stunned disbelief. Zarnath, the champion, had fallen, and standing victorious in the center was a human, Carter Rios. The kill count flashed on the display once more, but this time, the number wasn't just a statistic. It was a symbol, one that would forever change the galaxy's perception of humanity. The crowd's stunned silence was broken only by the distant, fading echo of Zarnatha's last breath. And Carter, bloodied but unbowed, stood tall. The galaxy had just witnessed something they'd never forget. The game had changed. The room was cold, its metallic walls lined with shimmering holographic screens that flickered in the dim light. A dozen alien faces, each more menacing than the last, stared intently at the large display in front of them. On the screen, Carter Rios stood victorious, his chest heaving, his bloodied hands raised in triumph. The footage was raw, unfiltered, an unbroken moment that sent waves of shock through the elite members of the Galactic Council. The message had been clear. Humanity was no longer the weak species the Council had assumed. Across the room, the leaders shifted in their seats, their thoughts as cold as the room itself. For decades, they had watched from their ivory towers, manipulating the galaxy's power dynamics, dictating who would rise and who would fall. But now, in a single brutal display of strength, Carter had shattered their assumptions. The human species had just broken through the veil of irrelevance they had imposed on it, and that terrified them more than they cared to admit. This was not the plan, one of the council members growled, its voice laced with barely contained fury. It was an insectoid species, its 6 eyes narrowing as it glared at the flickering image of Carter. We underestimated them, another council member, a towering, reptilian creature, hissed in frustration. We thought this human was just another primitive soldier, easy to control, easy to dispose of. How could we have been so blind? His kill count, the first speaker continued, his voice rising, is unlike anything we've seen. He's taken down Varric, Zarnath, 2 of the most legendary gladiators in history, and now we're left with the question, how many more are there like him? How many more humans? The words hung in the air, the gravity of them settling in with an uncomfortable finality. They had invited Carter to the tournament for one reason, to test the limits of humanity's potential. The Council's plan had been to expose Earth for what they believed it truly was, a fledgling, war-torn species with no place in the galaxy's order. They'd assumed that by bringing Carter to the arena, they could demonstrate humanity's weakness to the galaxy. But now, Carter had flipped the script, and the galaxy was watching a human warrior who had already begun to outclass their finest champions. "We miscalculated," said a third member, an android-like figure, its voice mechanical but tinged with something akin to unease. "We believed Carter Rios would die like the others. A quick spectacle, an easy way to display humanity's place beneath us. But he's proven us wrong in the most public way possible." The council members exchanged looks, their minds racing. To them, Carter was no longer just a pawn in their game. He was a symbol, an embodiment of everything they had feared, the rise of a species they had thought too weak to challenge the galactic hierarchy. "What do we do now?" asked a fourth member, a slug-like creature whose body shimmered with bioluminescence. "He's becoming a legend in the arena. If he wins again, the galaxy will no longer see Earth as a backwater planet. We may lose control of the entire sector." Silence fell over the room. Carter Rios had become an enigma, a human warrior whose prowess could no longer be ignored. The council's carefully controlled order, the structure they had maintained for eons, was now at risk of falling apart. "We cannot allow this to continue," the reptilian leader finally said, his voice low and full of menace. "We will eliminate him before this human grows into something impossible to contain." The words were spoken with certainty. Carter's rise had shaken the council to its core, but in the shadows, behind the layers of power and politics, the true fear was beginning to take hold. What if humanity wasn't just a fluke? What if Carter was the first of many humans capable of defying their power? What if Earth had more surprises in store than the galaxy was ready to face? As the council members convened in whispered discussions, planning their next move, the galaxy beyond them continued to shift. The invitation had been a test, but it had sparked something much larger than anyone could have predicted. The question no longer was whether Carter Rios would survive the tournament. It was whether the Galactic Council could stop what they had just unleashed. Back in the arena, Carter was already preparing for his next fight. But this time, he wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting to prove that humanity had no intention of being controlled. The game had changed, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The air crackled with anticipation as Carter Rios stepped into the arena for the final time. The once vibrant lights now seemed cold, casting long shadows across the battlefield. The roar of the crowd was deafening, but Carter barely heard it. His focus was absolute, his mind clear. He had been through countless battles before, but this fight was different. This fight would decide everything. Across from him stood his final opponent, a creature so feared and respected that even the most hardened warriors hesitated to speak its name. Zephyros, the last champion of the galactic tournament, had never been defeated. Its towering frame, nearly 3 meters tall, was covered in sleek, shining armor that seemed to ripple with an unnatural energy. Its eyes burned with a cold, calculated rage, scanning Carter with the precision of a predator. Zephyros wasn't just a fighter. It was a weapon, an engineered monstrosity designed to dominate. Carter cracked his neck and shifted his stance, readying himself for what was to come. He wasn't intimidated. He couldn't afford to be. He had come this far by doing what no one else could do, thinking ahead, adapting, and using every ounce of his training to outsmart his opponents. Zephyros might be stronger, faster, and more powerful than anything he had ever faced, but it didn't have the one thing Carter did. The bell rang, a deep, resounding tone that echoed across the arena, signaling the beginning of the final showdown. Zephyros wasted no time. It lunged forward with terrifying speed, its massive fist swinging down at Carter with the force of a falling star. Carter ducked under the blow, narrowly avoiding being crushed. The force of the strike left the ground quaking, sending debris flying. Zephyros didn't stop. It pressed forward, its movements fluid and precise, relentlessly targeting Carter with a barrage of punches and kicks. Each hit was a thunderous shockwave that threatened to pulverize everything in its path. Carter danced around the attacks, using his agility to weave in and out of Zephyros's reach. His mind raced, calculating the creature's next move before it even made it. Zephyros was a force of nature, but Carter was no longer just a man. He had become something more, honed in the crucible of battle, every fight leading him closer to this moment. He understood the stakes now, better than anyone in the galaxy. As Zephyros closed in again, Carter ducked low and rolled beneath the champion's legs, coming up behind it with lightning speed. He launched a series of strikes to the weak points in the armor, targeting the joints where the plating was thinnest. His punches were precise, each one landing with surgical accuracy. But Zephyros wasn't fazed. The creature's armor absorbed the blows, and with a deafening roar, it spun around, throwing Carter off balance. The force sent Carter tumbling across the arena floor, but he quickly regained his footing, his body aching but unbroken. He knew he couldn't keep up this pace forever. Zephyros was too powerful, too fast. But Carter had something it didn't: strategy. He scanned the arena, his mind working in overdrive. The walls of the Colosseum were lined with advanced technology, weapons and energy fields designed to create chaos and hinder the fighters. Carter knew exactly where the danger zones were, and more importantly, where he could turn the tide in his favor. Zephyros advanced again, this time with a vicious overhead strike that would have crushed anyone in its path. Carter sidestepped, leading the champion toward one of the energy fields at the edge of the arena. As Zephyros swung down with all its might, Carter took a quick step to the side and jumped right into the path of the energy field. The field hummed to life as Carter triggered it, and in an instant, it shot a surge of electrical energy into the arena. Zephyros, too focused on Carter, didn't see it coming. The energy field flared brightly as it collided with Zephyros's armor, sending a shockwave through the champion's body. The creature staggered back, its movements jerky and uncoordinated as the energy coursed through its system, disrupting its internal systems. Carter didn't waste a second. He closed the distance, using the momentary distraction to launch a series of rapid attacks. He struck at the weak points of Zephyros's armor, each blow forcing the champion back further and further. It was clear now that the champion wasn't invincible. Carter's persistence, his strategy, had done what no one else thought possible. He was wearing Zephyros down, and with each passing second, the champion was losing its edge. But Zephyros wasn't finished. With a roar of rage, the creature swung its arm in a wide arc, sending Carter sprawling across the arena floor. The blow had been powerful, but Carter wasn't out. He fought through the pain, rising to his feet once more. The crowd's roar was deafening, their excitement palpable, but Carter wasn't hearing it anymore. His vision was focused solely on Zephyros, the creature now visibly slower, more vulnerable than before. This was it, the final moment. Carter knew what he had to do. With a burst of speed, Carter charged at Zephyros, using every ounce of his remaining strength to close the gap. The champion tried to react, but it was too slow. Carter dove under Zephyros's guard, slipping through the gaps in its armor. In one fluid motion, he planted his blade in the vulnerable area beneath the creature's ribcage. Zephyros's eyes widened in disbelief as Carter drove the weapon deep, twisting it to ensure the strike hit home. The champion's body shuddered, its strength fading as Carter's attack finally took its toll. With a final guttural cry, Zephyros collapsed, lifeless, onto the arena floor. Silence fell over the stadium. For the first time since the tournament had begun, there was no cheering, no applause, just stunned silence. Carter stood over the fallen champion, his chest rising and falling with exertion, blood streaking his face. He had done it. He had won. As the digital display flashed his kill count for the final time, one last victory to cement his place in history, Carter felt nothing but a cold, quiet satisfaction. The galaxy had underestimated him, and now they would know better. Humanity had arrived, and it was here to stay.